and welcome back. It's been a while since I've seen you here on my podcast, and I'm happy to have you, I have to admit. Well, this is the Overpower Mountain podcast. I am your host, Marcel, the greatest Overpower player of all time. It is definitely GOAT o'clock, my friend Josh. Thank you so much. Well, we got a big episode for you today, so I'm going to start to crack at it right away. I have to say, I missed the Champ of Champs. Uh, it was due to sickness. I did catch whatever random flu you want to discuss, whatever name you want to give it, but I'm going to call it the ass kicking flu because it sure um, kicked my ass. Um, and by ass, I mean donkey. That's uh, that's what I definitely was this weekend. That's for sure. Definitely not a goat. But much like in the way I'm going to return, I shall give you the goat's eye view of the champ of champs from my point of view. Now, obviously, when you're looking at a tournament from outside perspective, sometimes you can actually notice a lot more things than the people who are actually there because you're so micro focused on everything from your own personal experience to trying to keep track of the hot decks of the day, trying to keep track of everything, and essentially I hope I can bring you some sort of eye-opening perspective on some of the things that I think happened this weekend. It was an interesting weekend overall. I have to admit that you know, decks were a little maybe less creative than I thought they were going to be. I don't know if I exactly pegged the meta in my own mind. I really had thought that a lot of people were going to start branching into the prodigy way of thinking in terms of, a lot of dual negates, a lot of teamworks, but it really seemed like a lot of people kind of stuck with what felt right to them and what, was good for them, which I have to applaud in a weird sort of way because, that's what I've been teaching you when we talk about overpower. I was always trying to sort of push to your mind to pick something that works for you and to sort of like perfect it. And I think a lot of people sort of went back to a lot of their roots style decks, but there was also a couple of real eye openers and surprises. And we're going to get to those, my friends. So obviously, I did not make it. Decisions were made, and trust me when I say I waited till the exact last minute to decide whether or not I was going to go. I contemplated a 6-hour car ride in the condition I was in and what I would have to go through that weekend, and I obviously made the decision to stay home. Those are decisions that we make in life, and regret or not, one thing my loved one said to me was, there's going to be plenty other tournaments this year. And if that's the one truth of this year, it is the truth. At the end of the day, I have to say I missed everybody that was there. I really wanted to see a bunch of people, always coming out of the winter slumber. It's always nice to sort of see people again, get back into gaming. And, Champ of Champs is always just one of those where it's more of like an all-star game, like a celebration. So I've always really been akin to it, and everybody knows I own Ohio. So uh, I'll get there eventually again soon. Uh, let's not stress though, because like I said, I got you all, my friends. I got you all. And we are definitely going to get into the nitty gritty now in terms of the COC. Um, I'm going to give you the breakdown. However, we always start our broadcast with the latest in Overpower News. Overpower, 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 overpower news. So, what do we got going for you today? Well, a lot has happened, obviously, since my last podcast to now. And I'm not going to cover all the, unique little things that happened here or there, but I am going to talk about the most important things. So, obviously, the most important is the latest on the LRG and the ERB set. So, I have it under very good impression that everything is actually going according to plan. I know we are all surprised at this. LRG has not always been the greatest in terms of coming up with their timelines and sticking with them, but from what I hear, they are working with an amazing company called Cartamundi, and they are dead on with their scheduling. So, as of right now, from what I am being told, both starter decks and booster box cards are almost finished printing. They will actually being sent out within the next week or so to be packaged and then sent out to you, me. Yes, that's right, folks. We are that close to our new cards. Um, with that being said, I have to say, um, I have to say that I was a little bit shocked actually. They opened up a week-long portal of add-ons, and from what I was actually told, they actually sold an additional $40,000 worth of product. Now, if you recall, the actual Kickstarter roughly got around $300,000. So that's an additional 10% in 1 week. That means either the word is getting out, people are getting antsy. I highly doubt people bought $40,000 worth of new product. I imagine a lot of people just sort of jumped on at that point in the grand scheme of the Kickstarter option. I guess it wasn't a Kickstarter much at that point in time, as the add on was actually directly through them. From what I've been told from the higher ups, all of the add ons were correlated. They were added and actually will be added to your initial purchase. So you will actually be getting your add on at the same time as you are getting your original cards. I am incredibly excited to see these cards. I have to say, just like you, friends, I'm excited about thinking about new combos, thinking about new characters, whether it be in the modern or in the legacy format. I'm really excited to sort of delve in and almost go back to if people ever listen to my podcasts, I do a history section. I've actually only done one. I have two more that are finished. I've kind of held off as one of the friends that I referenced that I started the game with, Jesse, he has passed away, and it's just been really hard for me to sort of put those out and listen to them myself. So they are coming, but those history lessons will be out soon. Um, I have to say, as we go on, and I'm excited, and I think about these cards, and I think about the first time I opened an Overpower pack. I'm really excited to get back there. And one of the big excitements from the initial Overpower was the big money tournaments that they started to run. A lot of people, if you look at the original ventures, you'll actually see there was like $5,000 opening tournaments and $10,000 nationals and things along those lines. And I have to say, in the onus of that, LRG is actually really bringing that back. They will be doing 4 regionals this year. I believe their schedule is coming out very shortly. It's actually going to be $20,000 per regional, divvied up into prize pool, and then the national being a $25,000 total money event. So I can only imagine that's going to be like a $15,000 first prize. This is big. This is, a lot of people, some people can't even make that kind of money in a year. Or for others, that's a part-time job that you can win all in one tournament. So I have to say, it's brought an excitement to my mind and a reinvigoration of studying the game, looking at the game, and thinking about the game in a deeper manner where you can kind of almost hunt these bigger prizes. I will obviously keep everything up to date in terms of when they come out. For your knowledge, I want everybody to be able to get to these sort of things and test your might. as they say. I look forward to playing all of you and probably, hopefully, no, beating all of you and, taking one of these regionals and potentially the national down myself. So, it's going to take a lot of sickness for me to not make it to those ones. In other news, what can I say? The first tournament is around the corner. This would be the first NAOL tournament. This is actually being run by now a friend of mine, Carl Carfino, and I believe it's still being assisted by Josh Alexander and Ricky Sauceda as well. It is now being coined as the Kickstarter Tournament, and it is in Dallas, Texas. It will be the first tournament with LRG and ERB cards combined. What a shootout it will be, I promise you that. From what I know, it will be May 9th and 10th. Friday will be an all modern event, and the Saturday will be the first ever mixed legacy format event. Now, they will be playing with all LRG rules. Now, you're like, Marcel, what are you talking about? And what I'm referencing is, as we all read, there are a few rule changes, several rule changes that are coming into play. The soft launch of the Mulligan rule was just played in the Champ of Champs to get people sort of understanding it. I did get a mixed reaction from players on that, and I do hope that, LRG does enter this year with an open mind, that if something's not working, or if it is working, that they either stick or move away from it. And we'll see how it goes. The LRG new rule set. I'm not going to dive too hard into it right now. As a matter of fact, I'm not even going to talk about it anymore past just telling you that the new LRG rule set will be in play for that NAOL tournament. Now, I will cover in a tournament or in a podcast very shortly, okay, all the rule changes, and I will actually try to break down how you can sort of go from old mentality to new mentality in gameplay. But again, you can imagine how long that might be and how much that might take to figure out, for a podcast. So I want to just make sure that I can make it as smooth and flowing as it is. So any questions, please do reach out to Carl Carfino. I know he's on a lot of the boards and he will assist you if you are planning to head to Dallas May 9th and 10th. Well, with that being said, I'm going to say that is all in the news, and we will get back to you next week. I do have one thing that is working down the pipeline. It appears that LRG and the GOAT will be doing an official crossover podcast within the next, I'm going to say, week. I can't really talk about what is going to be on the podcast. It may not actually be on my regular Wednesday time, so do keep your eyes peeled if anything pops up in terms of a special podcast that will happen very, very shortly. That's about all I'm going to tease you on that. And friends, that is the Overpower news. Overpower news. This is the point where in the podcast, I usually go right into my OP talk. I'm going to go into an OP talk today, but I figured the talk that most people want at this point in time, and it's what a lot of people I think are sort of like gearing for, is the breakdown of the COC. Now that's the Champ of Champs. This is the Champ of Champs shirt from last year. Sadly, I did not get one from this year. Kudos to whoever got my shirt. Wear it proudly. Right away, I think I'm going to talk about the promo that was given away at COC before we dive into sort of the decks and the breakdown of the meta that occurred. The promo that was given away at COC was obviously a great honor to a lot of people that work very hard in this game and have worked to sort of push the game forward for all of you, the fans out there at home. The promo set that was given away was a dupe or a mock of the Infestation Incident event set. I believe it had faces all the way ranging from Jack to Joe G, to a bunch of faces you may or may not know in the Overpower world, and I'm assuming you're going to know them now. The event set, very much obviously, a la the 25th anniversary of Overpower set, sort of mimicked that idea, and they did a 30th anniversary Overpower set as well. Um, of course, all the events were exactly the same, as you would see them in the Infestation Incident event set itself, except for one. There was one additional event added. Now, this was done to sort of, I guess, close a circle in Overpower. And, we talk about often events and how powerful they are. And of course, a lot of you reading between the lines have seen that a lot of these events will dominate games, change games, win games, turn the tide of games. And one event was, I almost want to say, glaringly omitted throughout the whole idea. And it's kind of interesting that they did omit it. It definitely gave a boost to the stat, but there was never an event that said no cards with an intellect icon may be used to attack. I can't express how many times I built decks and I'm like, I wish that event existed. Being able to sort of like pair something up, with an old school thought of like Scarlet Witch or Ghost Rider and their multi-eights being able to be used, through an event like that, or being able to finally combat these secondary effect or these secondary stat decks that sort of lean a lot on intellect. I think it would actually have come in quite handy, as you can see both the top two decks ended up having intellect as its secondary stat. You know, Obviously, again, thank you for the honor. I did end up actually being on one of the events. I believe the event I am on in Infestation Incident is the one that states remove all hits with a strength or brute force icon from permanent records. Great in the new meta. I'm going to say strength is strong. I can definitely see my face being played possibly against myself and not liking it and reaching across the table, ripping up your GOAT card and then handing you a brand new one just because I was upset about it. Of course, I'll sign the new one for you. You know what I'm talking about, friends. So with this new event, I have to say, it opens up more doors again. It opens up a lot of possibilities in terms of, creating these anti-intellect decks, especially as Legacy starts to creep up. I think one of the first things people were sort of excited about and people sort of looked at was the new idea that, Baker Street might become a big playable home base as we move forward. Now, obviously, I do believe this is, a possibility, and intellect characters having a lot of the Baker Street style cards to sort of play with. This event set can truly, change that course. I think it's going to be one of those things that is going to be a very sneaky event set. So this is what I'll say. If you do plan on playing Legacy moving forward, I think this event set is a must-have. I know they have a rule where you're not allowed to proxy LRG cards, so I do suggest going and getting one of these sets. As far as I know, the one thing I want to say about these sets is, as of right now, they only printed 100 of them. I believe there was 30 people at the event, and then I believe the rest of the sets were being sold online. Now, again, I do highly recommend you do get one of these. I do believe, a lot of you do not have the 25th anniversary set. Even though it's the exact same as Shattered Image, A lot of people always talk about how they missed it and they wish they had it, and along those lines. So, with the fact it being, 100 card print or 100 set print, it's going to be pretty sought after pretty quickly. Now, I do have it under authority that there will be the ability for the person selling them online to reprint and sell additional copies. I have been told under pretty decent authority that the max print of all these sets will be 250. So you again can imagine with only 250 sets out there, I'm not exactly sure. Maybe Mage's Musings in the comments can sort of drop the idea. I'm not exactly sure how many of the 25th anniversary set were ever printed, but you can imagine, and you know how hard those are. You can't even get those. People do not trade those. Those are untradables. Those are very rare cards to get, and it's almost like a flex when you play them in a tournament. So all I'm saying, and I'm not an advocate to push you to buy cards, but I will say, buying one of these, maybe, banking one for later, you never know, it might be an amazing sort of trade bait in, 3 to 5 years if the legacy format is either, still thriving or maybe even, the dominant format at the time because a lot more people have sort of found these sort of other cards. Um, so you can imagine it's just a good thought. Choose your own. I'm sure they will be out there available at least the few first tournaments. But don't risk it because the next thing you know, you don't have it, and then it's that quick that you just missed out on the grand scheme. Uh, Before we get to the top 4 decks, I think there was another deck that stood out this weekend. And it came from, I'm not going to say a surprise source because, this gentleman is obviously a huge fan of the podcast. Anytime I speak to him about the game, he's always actually thinking about it. He's been in the game pretty much since, Monumental came out. Probably more sat in cars for longer than actually in tournaments. But from the Statesman Howard Bertrand, I have to say he brought a deck that, from what I hear, brought a buzz to the room. From the Friday night play-in to the Saturday night or Saturday main event, he came up with an idea, and I have to say, before I get into the idea, he came up with an idea that I haven't seen something dominate or do so well in such an intimidating fashion since maybe Sean Ballantyne's Trick or Treaters. There is something when you sit across from a max 6 deck and then you get yourself handed to yourself. There is something to that just strikes a chord in your inner player. And I have to say, I am so proud of you, Howard, for coming up with this style of deck, for thinking things through, for understanding, where the meta was, what people could do, what they couldn't do, and kind of taking that, but then understanding what you wanted to do. Building a deck that you understood the fundamentals to. You sat across from people and you played your deck. They had to play you. It wasn't you playing other people. Now, this is the root core of what I always try to teach you, Overpower friends, because when you have a deck that so synergy in your mind, you know it so well, you know what it's trying to accomplish, you know what you're trying to do, you know the cards you're waiting for, you know what you're looking to, you know your style of play and how you're trying to approach it. It just shows you can become an indomitable force right away. This is one of those moments where you can just truly, bring your own funk to a tournament. And oftentimes it'll take people the whole tournament to be able to figure it out. And that's a lot of the times all you need to sort of get there, get that win, and potentially win a tournament. Now, Howard did not end up winning the Champ of Champs, but I have to give this deck a little shout out and a little bit of credit. So, we have Storm Neutralized. That is the one that can play Morlock specials. We have Beyonder. We have Black Cat, and we have the Enforcers. He played this with the Onslaught Citadel and the Crossing event set. Now, I had a little like sort of text back conversation with Howard because I really was curious as to like where it came from, what was the inspiration, how was he winning, what was his style, what was he trying to accomplish. So first off, when you sit across from a Max 6 deck, the first thing, as most overpowered players would do, is lightly chuckle inside. After your inner laughter starts to die down, you go, okay, well, who am I going to attack first? Like, what does he have that he can throw my way? And then all of a sudden, you find yourself in round 2 or round 3 of the game, and you realize you're so far behind, and a combo is about to come out and there's nothing you can do. Well, this is kind of how he approached it, and gut punched a lot of people from what I heard. His conceptual idea for this was to get down to his Beyonder character as soon as possible. So now, through the different ways of just either A, letting characters die, because obviously the specials can be played through Beyonder, so anybody can die, it doesn't matter. Allowing the kill card to happen, and, obviously taking advantage in that mannerism. And then, of course, he has the Onslaught Citadel, which, through cards from Onslaught, you can kill one of your own characters. You can, do venture tucking. You can do a lot of different things. Plus, it also provides its own 2 lockouts. Now, the key to his deck was basically to get down to Beyonder as soon as possible, while keeping the game in somewhat of a venture reach. Now, when he gets down to just his Beyonder character, now he has access to 5 different lockout cards. Now, Black Cat being only fighting, Storm being only strength, Enforcers being only universe. You can imagine you're throwing attack after attack at just Beyonder, and he's just saying, only fighting, only strength, only universe. Oh, you actually had one more that could potentially get through all of that madness? Oh, okay. Post-protective plates. Once he was able to get into the situation where he was able to sort of lock off all of his characters, he's obviously venturing for the win. And you're like, well, there's several rounds in between where, the first round to where he's sort of getting to this sort of lockout scenario. Now, Howard really did a unique thing, and he sort of opened up his eyes and said, well, how can I mitigate my opponent from just like over venturing on me? Because as we've talked about a lot in our podcast, you look across the table and you see a 6, a 5, a 2, a 4, and some random specials. And in your mind, you're like, okay, I got an 11 over here, an 8, a 7, and any power 8, anything along those lines. So you're just like, okay, I'm going to venture 5, because like, sure, you're even on cards, but like all your cards are above a 6, and he's just sitting there with like a max 6, like literally a 6 that can come at you. So a lot of the people understand that like, okay, I could just, push venture on him, 2, 3, 2, get almost done at that point in time. Well, what Howard sort of did is he's basically bringing around the Storm card, which this Storm card right here, friends. Now, this was out of the Marvel set. And essentially what it says is, play during battle. Each player may only have one mission card ventured this battle. All other mission cards are moved back. So he's essentially doing almost like a Fortress of Solitude sort of approach to the way he is looking at how to mitigate you being able to sort of push venture on him. Now, a lot of people are like, okay, I would just negate that. Well, when he's throwing out all these cards that are sort of like locking things off, tucking, pulling out venture, doing a lot of other little tricky things, not only is he able to sort of lock off all these thoughts, but he's able to sort of just continuously lock down his characters. Now, getting to the point where he's ultimately in a position where he can himself bet 7 6 5 4 for the win is not that hard, as a lot of people are usually setting things up and moving things around. Now, obviously, when it comes to lockout cards, and especially the ones that are like slow and steady sort of aspects. You have the terms of like the beast, which is the only universe. You have the enforcers, which is the only universe. You have the storm, which is the only strength, and then of course the black cat, which is the only fighting. Now, obviously, when you're dropping those cards down, you're trying to look for like full lockouts as well. Now, Storm, of course, obviously always having the ability to have, she also has no universe as well, the Daredevil style card as well. So, there are probably plenty of times where he was like completely locking out characters with just 2 cards. And, at the end of the day, all he's essentially got to do is get any sort of venture through on you. Now, he has cards in his deck that sort of pierce through a lot of armors, whether it be Kiss of Death from Black Cat, which pierces, a male character can't, defend that. Now, I'm curious. I wasn't there, so I'm really truly curious if like how that was played, if it was played on like a team card. I imagine the ruling would have to be that they can't block it if there's a male character on the team. I'm unsure. I don't know if it ever came to a ruling. Howard, please, obviously in the comments, tell the people at home. But the fact that what I'm trying to get to with this deck is that he took a sec, he thought it through, he thought about the meta, he thought, okay, how can I contradict the meta, but how can I also at this point in time, manipulate it in my fashion? And lockout decks, I mean, it did take a bit of a gamble because, I can only imagine if there was dual negate decks rumbling around that this deck might have actually had a lot more of a problem, and of course, people chiming in right now in the comments with a lot of just even more, layered thoughts to Howard's deck, whether it be, Callisto being able to get what he needs in terms of, a card out of the Citadel for the win, or anything along those lines. Or, like I say, even cards that can just punch through, like Ox from the Enforcers can, can only be defended by a certain icon, and being able to sort of add venture through, I'm unsure which ones he used, but Post has an adventure, Holocaust has an adventure, and these cards are must negates as well. So this is what I'm going to say. Well done, Howard. Very well thought out. I think a deck like this and the nuances of it could probably be talked about for a whole podcast. But friends, we got a lot to still get to in this podcast. Kudos on the deck thought. This is the type of mentality I want you all to start adopting at home. Think of something that works for you. Think of something different. Think of something that you can push through and, make your own. And Howard, you definitely made a mark on this tournament. I would say it was the most talked about thing, other than, I guess, what we're about to get into. So, without further ado, we are going to talk about the top 4 decks, and I am going to break them down in Marcel Goat fashion for you. I'm going to do them in reverse order because I actually think the decks get a little bit more exciting and the decks get a little bit more unique as we sort of go from 1 through 4. So, the winner, congratulations, Phil Miller. You are the champ of the champs, my friend. Great job. Great tournament. I heard it was a slow, tough start, and then you just sort of kicked it in gear. Anybody who knows, Phil Miller is on the Mount Rushmore of overpowered players. He was placed there this past year, and this is only a crowning achievement that, dare I say, cements you on the mountain. So kudos to you, my friend. Very well done. I am super jealous. I'm not going to lie. I had all these plans in my head about how I was going to enter my podcast with the belt. I had all these wonderful thoughts about what I was going to do with it. It probably would have sat back there somewhere. I would have, done something with it. But, if you're willing, I will challenge you for that heavyweight belt one day, although I highly doubt you're going to let that thing out of your grasp. Pretty cool prize, LRG. Great work in terms of giving people something super excited and just something super different for a prize. I have to admit, there's a few times I'm jealous in life, and that's one of those moments where I just really wish I could have had a shot at it, but alas, moments take us the way they take us. So, Phil Miller. This is a replay deck from the first tournament he played in this year, which was the Canadian, the Peace Bridge Memorial, run by Howard Bertrand. And he debuted this deck. It actually played incredibly well at the tournament. He lost, I believe, in the top 8 round against myself in a match using this deck. And, I have to admit, it was probably one of those scenarios where, I was using, I won't call it new tech at the time, but Dracula's Armory was not exactly, totally out there in terms of all of its secrets. And, I did catch him by surprise with an Armory in 8, which totally swayed the game and sort of knocked him out of that tournament. So he decided to give this deck a second run. Now, I'm going to talk about why I think he gave this deck a second run. And I'm going to talk about it almost as a PSA warning to a lot of you at home. Okay. A lot of people show up to tournaments with their tournament deck, and they play in whatever Friday event with whatever, I guess, fun deck that they brought, or whatever the scenario is, and then they go back to their hotel room, and whoever they're staying with, they decide to play scab games, or just games that don't mean anything. Don't mean anything. They mean a lot, trust me. I don't play a lot of these games. If anybody knows me, I very rarely play at all on the Friday. I do this for a plethora of reasons. I used to outplay myself on weekends, and then, I'd be really tired for the Saturday event. But a lot of the reasons I don't play Friday night, especially with my tournament deck the next day, is because of something I speak to a lot of you about, and it's mentality going into a tournament. I have seen countless, and I'm talking countless times, of great players bringing great decks, sitting down the night before and playing 10 games against one opponent, losing every single one of those games, spending all night changing their deck, flipping their deck, alternating their deck, and basically making a bad decision. You already just destroyed your confidence in terms of going in the next day. Now you feel like you're going to lose every single game you could potentially lose the next day, even though you're just playing this one opponent. Maybe you were already tired. Maybe your deck just wasn't clicking against that particular opponent's deck. People need to sort of understand that it's fine to play your deck and refine it, but take things with a grain of salt. You've done all the work, you've done all the practice coming up with this deck and going to this tournament. And then you just play somebody the day before, and the next thing you know, you lose those games, and you're just like, oh, I'm not even going to play this deck. I'm not even going to play it. I know for a fact that Phil Miller played all night the night before, not with the deck that he won the tournament with, but with another deck, and was not doing very well at all. And basically, I'm assuming was killing his confidence. Thank God, he's a player that, shows bravado, as I'm sure you have all seen, and can push through that. But on the flip side of that, I believe he was actually playing Sean Ballantyne, and then Sean Ballantyne was flip-flopping between decks, and then, you know, sometimes even winning all the 10 games against an opponent can also put a wrong mentality on your mind. You know, I had a conversation with somebody who went to Champ of Champs, a player, and they spoke to me, and they talked about how they listened to the podcast and they understood what I'm trying to say, that mentality going into the tournament and playing in games and knowing that just because you lost the first hand or you lost the first game, to just not beat yourself up and to sort of like keep your mojo going, like nobody's going to win a tournament if you don't believe you can win it. This is not really a lot like, Texas Hold'em or something where like cards can sort of just fall into your lap, because, great players that you will play against in this game will always look for those micro mistakes that you're making and just uber capitalize on those. And as a new player, climbing the mountain, you get into these situations where essentially, you know, you make this micro mistake, you realize you did it, you beat yourself up. But if you just hold on, you hold strong, you can continue and actually win a lot of those games back if you just keep the strength of mind. That's all I'm going to say about that. It's interesting that he did not play this deck the night before and then sort of, got dominated to whatever degree, and then, went back to something that I think was more comfortable for him, more up his playstyle alley. And I think it showed, ultimately, as he did win the tournament. So he ended up playing White Queen, Spawn, Mole Man, Doctor Strange in reserve, AOA as the battle site, and then Assault on Onslaught. You know, I have to say this. Lot of great thoughts here. This is a very Phil Miller cooked up deck. Yes, he held the shell. Yes, he's holding on to his crutches. But at the end of the day, in this actual particular style of tournament, I'm not going to lie, I contemplated playing the crutches. I was working on different sort of ideas where I was sort of trying to play against like a dual negate meta. And defensive style cards are actually really good when it comes to fighting against a dual negate teamwork heavy meta. So him going back to this was actually a really smart idea. I'm not the biggest fan of AOA. I've used it plenty of times in tournaments. I understand the reasoning behind it. I think in this particular deck, it really catered well for him, because what he was able to do was he was able to use Morph's Power Mimic as sort of his secret weapon or hidden gun. Now, he's using this card a lot of the times, I'm assuming, as an additional JW or JZ that's being sitting on his table. Now, of course, the JW being from White Queen and the JZ being from Mole Man himself. So you can understand, when a top tier player is sitting across from a person and you're making these little micro mistakes, And he just sees an opening where, he threw his JW and his 8, and then you're like, okay, I'm past that, I don't need to deal with that anymore. But, of course, sadly, you took the JW and it's on the record. Next thing you know, he throws another card over there, and here's another JW and a 7, you know, because the power mimic was able to sort of duplicate that. These are all the thoughts that, like, when you're playing against decks, you always have to sort of like think, what could his OPD be? What could this happen? What could so on? Now, Assault on Onslaught also, I think, brought something to the deck. Now, normally, again, not my favorite event set. I did actually like the way he used to use it with the Iron Man. It made a little bit of sense to me. I actually think that event set would actually work and cater very well to like an Iron Man, a She-Hulk, a Colossus style deck, where all of a sudden their avoid draws actually become, any hero for the whole deck. So really nice in terms of, and what I'm referencing is an Assault on Onslaught. There's a mission that says all specials may be played by any character. So essentially making any special in your deck an any character style special. Now, in this situation, though, it catered to the fact that now all of a sudden he was able to create that JW8 coming from Spawn, because now the JW can be played through Spawn or Doctor Strange, whoever's still alive at that particular time. So really great concept in terms of the overall deck. He played very well. We're going to get into, after these top 4, I'm just going to touch very quickly on what I was actually going to play at Champ of Champs, as I'm sure you were all curious as well. So I really like the idea. He looked at the meta, he thought about dual negates. He thought, okay, if I can defend a lot and then I have cards that can punch through negates, either a la the JW or the JZ, it's really great in terms of a counter to these sort of dual negate concepts. There really wasn't many at the tournament, so he kind of was able to sort of play to this advantage. Now, what I'm really shocked is a deck like this really gets destroyed with no cards with an energy icon may be used to attack. So I'm sure he did things to mitigate that aspect to it, but all I got to say, kudos, great deck, great player. And, I think that's one of those decks that, he's played it. It's his style. It caters to him. And once you find something like that, friends, stick with it. You can see players like Sean Sawyer continuously playing his Beyonder deck and getting good results with it because he knows it like the back of his hand. It's a great thought to use, and it's what I say to you as well at home. Like, don't always just run away from a good idea because you had a bad tournament. Sometimes sticking with something is the way to go, and I can only say that moving forward as we enter with all these brand new cards and styles and things along those lines. You really should think about that as we move forward, because you might want to stick with your Robin Hood deck until you've figured out the full nuances as we move into sort of the next generation. All right, deck that came second. Congratulations, Justin Sade, one or the other. He is another person who has stuck with his guns. This one we have the Starjammers, the Hand, Dark Beast, and Silver Sable in reserve. He had the Outback as his battle site, and he had Annihilation Affair as his event set. Now, Justin, in comments online, has said that he found a lot of inspiration from, Greg Costa's deck of playing the Hand and Jammers together. I would actually say this deck very, very similarly resembles the draw deck that I actually had way back in the day as well, just with a different mentality. I have to say there's one thing I'm going to sort of touch upon in this deck that I am incredibly proud of him, that he came to this sort of fruition of thought. What I'm going to reference now is I had this thought process probably midway through last season, and I was actually trying to sort of come up with and perfect the idea of what I'm about to talk about. Now, Justin did what I call double hate. And, we all try to have these events that I reference, you know, no cards with an energy icon, no cards with a strength icon, no cards with a fighting icon, now no cards with an intellect icon. And you sort of choose an icon to hate against. And it's sort of like your gun against, particular decks. Now, it's amazing that Justin came up with this idea because I was already on it, and the way he came across it was exactly how I came across it. And basically the way I looked at it is I said midway through the season, I said, okay, energy and strength are the two metas that are revolving around this season. How can I double hate this? Well, it's easier, of course, a lot of the times to get the no energy icon event in your deck. A lot of decks can sort of cater to that a lot better, aka strength decks and so on. And then I was actually trying to contemplate pairing it up with Mac Gargan as the other hate version. Now, I never found the ability that the battle site that Scorpion's on was strong enough to sort of like get this conceptual idea across, even though I think the decks that cater to no energy icon as the event are a little bit easier to build. Now, what he did, and I obviously, came across this idea as well myself, but what he did is he actually did it the opposite way around. And he did no strength icons may be used to attack. And then through his battle site, much like I was thinking, he did the secondary hate, which was the energy hate. And we all saw it happen in the finals game there in Champ of Champs, where I believe he got almost 7 cards through Absorb Sound. Now, this ability where Justin now is able to play double hate or have a smoking gun against both an energy style deck and a strength style deck, and especially the strength one being non-negatable, and like they have to sort of just eat that, really, really top-notch thinking here. Like, this is where like people are starting to escalate their thoughts to GOAT level thoughts here. The double hate idea, and you should consider this as we move forward. Obviously, I don't want you to, because you might end up playing against me, but I'll have something cooked up for you. Don't worry about that. This idea of a double hate concept is probably like gonna eventually reach and be the pinnacle of what I think legacy decks are going to start to produce. Now, obviously, I haven't seen all the new cards, so I'm sure there might be other hate style cards in the new set, and we're going to sort of figure out how that all works. But I have to just say, between him understanding, now, I again think this deck might have had a little bit more of an issue against a dual negate teamwork style deck, but that didn't seem to be the meta that was occurring. So, him taking the chance on this and sort of like having so many big boy cards that you have to negate either through the jammers or Bakudo, Madame Gao, the Beast 9, no specials from Sentinels out of the Outback. He is just throwing a plethora of cards that you have to deal with. And then, of course, being ready to just go Absorb Sound, get rid of all your energy icons that you have anywhere, either in hand or placed. Great concept, great deck, especially being a mono suit. It really was a dual suit, but a mono 8 style deck. I have to say, kudos, Justin. Great job. You have been rising up the Overpower Mountain. I know you're a fan and you listen and you take my words to heart. We've had many conversations at tournaments in regards to everything, but this is all you, my friend. And this just shows people at home, Justin's only a couple of years into the game and already, competing for like the top notch tournaments. This shows that if you study, you think about the game, you work on the game, you watch film, you critique yourself honestly after tournaments, you can really raise up very quickly through the ranks of Overpower. I believe in you. Trust me, I want to see you get there. I want to see everybody getting to the level where they're not scared and they sit down across from any opponent, and you know what your deck does so well that it almost doesn't matter who you're sitting across or what 8 cards they draw, because you're going to play your deck to the top of its ability. So kudos. I don't think there was overly too much there in terms of the deck, other than like the double hate sort of angle in terms of his meta approach. But, just because I'm saying there wasn't much there in terms of the meta, that is still a huge, huge, huge thought process on his own. I am going to get to deck 3 and 4. Third place, Joe Peters. Wow, wow, wow. Talk about another player who looks at the game from a completely different angle and essentially makes it his own. Now, Joe Peters very famously, known for playing with great power style decks from Spider-Man, constantly regurging, looking for 3-draw 2s and, taunts and just scary, scary things. Really a great player in terms of understanding venture, understanding when to play around, when to not play around. And again, another player that I'm going to sort of say is, or I'm going to sort of say that, looks at the game, makes it his own, and moves forward in that fashion. Now, Joe Peters and Carl Carafino, a lot of people may not know this, made a side wager previous to the tournament. They wagered with each other that whoever could make it farther in the tournament with Hobgoblin would win the bet. They came third and fourth in this tournament. Now, I know what the bet was for, and, kudos to you, Joe Peters, for winning it. I'm sure you're going to be very happy with your prize. But talk about some outside motivation to escalate your game. Now, I don't know about the rest of you. I'm not a big wagering kind of guy, and I already feel there's enough pressure in a tournament to what I'm trying to deal with, let alone having some sort of side wager that is adding sort of stress in terms of like on your mind. That's the last thing I think I need in the grand scheme of things. However, these two gentlemen went for it, and boy, did they come correct. So Joe Peters brought you Hobgoblin, Beyonder, Beast the Brute, and Little Magneto in reserve. He brought you Stark Enterprises and The Crossing. So what we're doing here is obviously The Crossing, Beyonder. Yeah, that's right. I will say when you are making a Beyonder deck that The Crossing is one of those sort of almost go-tos. There's very few reasons I think you wouldn't want the kill card per se in your Beyonder deck. I could potentially see maybe like a switch reserve event also being just as strong, with some sort of conceptual ideas with Beyonder, but obviously playing the kill card, great idea. It gets a character eliminated on the other board side, and then of course on your side, Beyonder gets to play all the specials through it. Now, I also sent a text thread with Joe Peters and just sort of asked him, what was his concept? What was he going for? What was he trying to accomplish with this deck? He responded to me that the goal of the deck was really to apply a lot of offsuit pressure through a sort of offsuit special KO pressure, with all the different facets he could sort of come up with. Whether it be, Beast the Brute throwing, 4 strengths, or the 9 fighting, or Hobgoblin also having this particular card. Now, this is an MOE card, okay? Now, you can't overtly see it that well, but boy, was this their hidden gem throughout the day. Now, it's a 3 intellect, and it basically says acts as a level 3 intellect. If defended, opponent must discard 1 card from their hand into dead pile. That's a big card. You throw that immediately first attack. Obviously, as a player, I'm going to look at that 3 and I'm going to be like, I take it. I'm not going to lose a card from my hand. I'm not going to defend that. I take it. You know what I mean? And what that immediately does is now there's the biggest offsuit intellect on you. And next thing you know, you're just like, well, I can't even. Now his main suit is like a kill to me, and like all his big high power cards are kill cards to me. And it just becomes this sort of like cyclical, sick idea. I actually didn't grasp that that's what that card said. I actually, anytime I read that, I actually put it in my head as if successful, discard 1 card from hand. The fact that you can't even defend that, let alone if that's a kill, like if that's a kill on one of your characters, you have 1 card left in your hand, you have to defend it. Like or you have 2 cards left in your hand, you have to defend it, and you're going to lose the other card just for defending it. Like, what a twisted sort of card. From what I know, Carl Carafino actually created that card, and has actually used it to amazing sort of precedence. We're going to get to his deck in a second. Now, Joe Peters, obviously playing the Beyonder aspect, he played a lot of unique angles, and the layers to his deck were actually really well thought out. Whether it came from the idea that he had 2 OPDs per character, all of his characters had 1 per deck, so he was essentially killing the card or killing the character that the most OPDs came out. So when his kill card came up, he was actually finding it advantageous to himself. Oh, I already played this OPD. This character can go. I'm not going to really dupe anything, and you're obviously going to have issues. Now, the other aspect he played, obviously having Little Magneto in reserve with 2/1 per decks, is, you could get to a situation where your kill card doesn't come up fast enough. Well, he was actually using Stark Enterprises for that, and he was using the Hawkeye switch to not only give him a big venture swing, but also to have the ability to do the venture swing plus bring up a big Magneto with a potential 11 placed on him, or any of those scenarios. Now, I actually am under the understanding that he could have actually kept the Magneto 11 in his hand as long as he had a Hawkeye, because he has the ability to make that happen, and it's actually not a discard. So you can understand how you could manipulate around. Now, of course, if the Hawkeye gets negated, you're in a bad scenario because now you're holding cards, but it doesn't matter because, at that point they then become bluff cards. But really just well thought out deck. You can imagine between the Magneto 4s, the Hobgoblin cards, the Beast cards, like there's a lot of action coming of different suits just across the board. Like, this is one of those decks where you can't even take a 2 or a 1 because it's going to be so offsuit that it's just going to create this KO pressure that you're just going to have to consistently, get to the point where you're going to sort of concede battles because you can't lose that 8 character. Dare I say, you decided to play a mono 8 character, and the next thing you know, you can't lose him. So you have to ultimately sort of like concede the battle or just lose a character and then play towards the next, and the KO pressure's still there. Now, I have to just say, I thought it was an incredibly well thought out deck. I think there was a lot of layers to it as well, especially the fact that, like, he's forced to use the character Hobgoblin due to their sort of, preemptive gamble of a wager between the two of them, but a very well thought out way to use the character. And he is also a player that, just like I said, because of his previous iterations of decks with Spider-Man or doppelganger, whatever the scenario may be, he really understood the venture aspect of sides. And that's something we're going to eventually get into in a podcast coming up soon, where we're going to discuss a little bit more about venture and venturing. But it is probably one of the final arts in this game of Overpower that when you master it, you'll just realize that games are usually a lot closer than you think, or can actually be flipped into a mannerism upon which, you can sort of alter games and play things in better ways. So kudos to you, Joe Peters. Congratulations on a third place champ of champs, coming all the way up from Seattle. That's not an easy flight. That's not an easy anything. Any of us who went the other way realized very quickly that, that's a lot on your body in the grand scheme. And, great play. Really wish I got to see this deck in its full fruition. I'm sure I will one day, or at least a type of version of it. I'm going to get to the last deck now. The deck that came fourth. Carl Carafino. Carl, I reached out to him personally as well and sort of said, what were you thinking? What were your thoughts behind it? What were you trying to accomplish? He played Juggernaut, Heroes for Hire, Hobgoblin, and Spider-Woman in reserve. He played the Outback, and he played the Crossing. He did not play the kill card. If anybody was curious, the kill card was not one of his events. The fact that this guy of all people made the biggest stir all weekend is so amazing to me. The fact that, we see characters like Galactus and Hobgoblin and things along those lines. It just shows that people are looking deeper into this game now and not just sticking with the basic sort of concepts and looking for these deeper thoughts. Now, Carl sent me a voice note. I don't usually do that kind of thing. I'm not overly, tech savvy like my friend Carl, which he blatantly called out and called me a grandma because I was just trying to text him about what's going on. So he sent me a voice note, and it was about 5 minutes long. And I sat and listened to that voice note like a fan, like a true fanboy. The way he described his deck build, to his concept, to the understanding of even the way he was going to play his cards, like which cards were going to be played first, to which cards were going to be played second, to how he was going to play towards his events, how his events affected his deck, was a masterclass. Sadly, again, not being overly tech savvy, I did not realize that after you listen to a voice note that it just deletes itself right out of your text messages. You have to actually save it. So this was a one-shot deal that I got to hear, and sadly nobody will ever get to hear it in, other than the people in the Etherverse who maybe will get to tap into that somehow. Brilliant. Brilliant, brilliant. The way he talked about it just absolutely made me even relook at how I look at Overpower. Very well done. Carl is, I will call at this point in time, a veteran style player. Has been around for years now. Avid student of the game. I am talking watches film like the best of them. And what he came up with and what he described of how he approached this deck in this tournament was brilliant. And I'm about to get into it for you, friends, because I'm going to try and convey as much of, the masterclass he gave in that 5 minutes to you in just a few minutes myself. So essentially the way Carl approached the deck was understanding that Hobgoblin
was going to be viewed on a Juggernaut Heroes for Hire deck as the weak link. Not only are people going to sit across and think that this is a weak link style deck, but they're actually going to sit across and go, okay, obviously I'm going to kill Heroes for Hire, obviously I'm going to kill Juggernaut, and then I'll get around to Hobgoblin. Well, boy, did my friend have a great concept. So what he basically was doing was, and he even told me on numerous accounts that this happened, he was using the over aggression of his deck to his advantage. So he was just consistently putting pressure, KO pressure, KO pressure, KO pressure on you, and not really letting you have a moment to sort of sit back and relax on things. What I mean by that is he was doing things like throwing Heroes for Hire, JW, and then the 8 out. And then he'd turn around and sorry about that. He'd play this card. Now, what is this card? Everybody's like, wow, what is that Masters of Evil card? What does that Hobgoblin card do? Well, what it does, my friends, it actually says take any one card from your power pack. Then Hobgoblin may play attacks face down for a remainder of game. Opponent may discard 2 cards from the top of draw pile into dead pile to reveal the attack. Well, he just threw a JW and an 8 at you, then plays this, pulls his 8 right back off the top of that power pack, and now just basically got 2 8s. Now all the Hobgoblin cards are going upside down at you. Now, a lot of people may be like, whatever, throw an attack upside down, I don't care. Until the first one comes at you, and you're like, I don't even know what that is. Now, I'm going to show you something right now that he just blew my mind with after that. And what an amazing concept that was. Well, he would play that card, and then either the first or second attack he threw at you would then be this card again. Yes, that's right. And he told me a great moment where he was playing against one of the top tier players. He threw the attack upside down. What did the player do? Spawn 1 to 9 avoid. Oh my God. Do you understand what just happened there? Not only is that spawn 1 to 9 avoid, sure, yeah, it's defending that card, but now you're dropping a card out of your hand just because you defended that card, and you didn't even know that. So, next thing you know, you're conceding because he just 2-for-1'd you with a Hobgoblin 3. Breathtaking. Another moment in the tournament that happened for him as well, same scenario, Hobgoblin playing cards face down. Well, Hobgoblin has another one per deck that says, target character may not attack for remainder of battle, like a pure lockdown card. He threw that upside down. Person tried to defend it with a random attack, or with a random power card, thinking, oh, it was just a random card. He flips it over. It not only locks the character down, they lose that defense, and that person just immediately conceded. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant stuff here. Now, then you have to go, okay, that's great thought process, but what if those cards don't land? Well, all you have to do, friends, you throw this in the first battle. What did I tell you as a top tier player? I'm probably going to take that 3 because I don't want to defend it and all of a sudden lose a card out of my hand. Okay, well, you just took a 3 intellect on your attack. Did you not just look across the board and see Heroes for Hire with a JW8? It's instant KO pressure. It's so well thought out in terms of you can't block that 3. And if you do, there's such a penalty to it that most people are going to take it. Well, now that 3-8 fighting strength combo coming next is just for the kill. And it's consistent. And let's just say you decide to, throw, these cards and essentially, defend them all, negate them all. Well, then the next thing he does is he throws out Juggernaut Rays at you and gets rid of all of your, universe cards. Like, it was layer after layer after layer that he was just discussing with me. And it wasn't just the way he was discussing all the abilities his deck had. It was the fact that he knew the nuances so finely and understood that he could play these cards first, and then all of a sudden you actually, had this inert, crazy pressure on you. Now, on top of that, he's playing the crossing. So, he's playing cards like no cards with the word teammate can go into play, which almost null affects his deck minus a teamwork or two and Spider Woman in reserve. But that was a card that, I made very popular in this last season, because when that card's on the table and you're sitting across from a strength deck, it's intimidating. What do you mean I can't use a card with the word teammate? You got 11s and 10s and 9s and 8s and 7s and everything galore. On top of that, Hobgoblin has this. Like, when you start looking through some of these cards, you can just contemplate that, like, wow, it's exciting. Like, the fact that these people are doing these thoughts and processes is just wow. It makes you want to, like, break out your collection and start looking at every card again and just re examining, like, how between, the synergy of a battle site to your team to these cards, like where this all can sort of mesh. Now imagine now when we have 41 brand new characters and you can start to even look for different synergies like this, like that Hobgoblin 3 or something that, maybe Robin Hood has, or somebody, Captain Nemo or whatever they have, or Count of Monte Cristo also has cards that I've seen or heard of that, like, can mimic this idea. So brilliantly done, like, you can't give kudos enough to, like, the fact that this guy was sitting across from you and just dominating you, and with no negate, let alone a dual negate deck. This guy was throwing no negates at you in sort of that mannerism as well. Now, obviously, picking something like the Outback to provide that extra defense angle to his deck as well. Just really well thought out. I have to say, Carl, super impressed with you, man. This is the type of thought process that gets you in the nominations to get in that last spot on Mount Rushmore, like, or OP Rushmore. Like, this is the things I'm just so like, as a fan, and I'm sure you can hear it in my voice, like, as a fan, it excites me when I see these sort of things. Like, I'm sitting at home sick and I'm like, Hobgoblin, what the crap? Like, why am I not there dominating this? And then I'm just like, oh man, I wouldn't have seen that coming. And, like, that's me, like, I wouldn't have saw that coming. I would have prayed that I would have, like, finished a game early and got to see a game where somebody was playing that, and I got to see, oh god, I got to keep an eye out for that. I got to think about that. I got to have that advantage, Really just super aggro kind of deck that it just shows that sometimes a great offense is better than any defense that you can have. You know, Hobgoblin for the win here, folks. Now, I'm going to sort of just go into a quick 2 second as well. Those were the top 4 decks. That's the kind of breakdown that I sort of saw looking at them. Again, congratulations to all 4 players. That was a tough weekend from what I heard, and a lot of great competition there. Congratulations to everybody that showed up and made second day or even just attempted the first day. You're not going to climb the mountain in one go, right? Like, if you do, your body's going to be done. So, it's incremental steps, slow steps up this mountain, friends, and just keep playing, keep garnering that experience, because that is where you're going to get it from. Listen to these podcasts, think about the words I'm saying and actually put them into practice. Don't just, listen to the podcast as a fan and, like, oh, that's nice, oh, Hobgoblin's great now. Understand why Hobgoblin's great now. understand how maybe you could use Hobgoblin in a sort of different sort of facet deck, you know? I could only imagine like a Hobgoblin Daredevil deck where everything's coming at you face down and you're just like, Jesus, like I just want to see a card to defend it here. Like the amount of manipulation and things you can do with face down cards is crazy. And the fact that I even know, like I said, a character in the new set even has like a card like this. Whew, get ready, folks. Like, this is where you need to start opening your mind. Now, I'm going to finish this on two things. I want to have a quick little chat session with you and at the end here, but I did promise that I was going to reveal to you. And of course, I can reveal it now because this is the end of the meta as we know it. Okay. All the metas leading up to this. Now, I'm not going to say that like team defense or strength decks aren't going to be, you know, a strong force moving forward. I just know that when this new card pool comes into play, that the meta is going to be like the sands of the Sahara, just forever shifting until all of a sudden a temple rises from the sand and becomes, dare what I say, like one of the new metas. Hilarious if it's going to be one of those Egyptian characters, and I just sort of like foreshadowed that. We'll see. Who knows? My final thought on the meta was this. I was looking at overpower in terms of as its progression. It shocked me that a lot of people did not play a dual negate teamwork style deck. I find that a lot of the masses often, and it actually makes me proud that it didn't happen because it shows that a lot of you are standing your ground and thinking of on your own and doing what's right for you. But a lot of the times the masses of overpower sort of follow the winning decks, you know, whether it be defensive decks of old, strength decks, dual negate teamwork decks. Like these are the things that a lot of people, you know, when they go to a tournament, they're like, okay, that just won, so I'm going to play that and hopefully win the next tournament. I thought a lot of people were going to sort of mimic the Prodigy approach to overpower. I'm shocked they didn't. Obviously, you know, the deck I'm building isn't just built around, you know, catering to fighting one meta or anything along those lines. It's always built to sort of like play the masses and be able to do it. The deck I was going to bring was a strength deck variant. I knew a lot of people were starting to play the Annihilation Affair event, and I was starting to worry about, you know, putting all my eggs into a full strength basket. And what I mean by that is like, you know, when you're playing the Juggernaut, Heroes for Hire, Beast the Brute lineup, you realize very quickly that it's a very, very strength dominant style deck, and anything like that Annihilation Affair can sort of like wipe you out in a hand, and it's very hard to sort of press through that. You know, a lot of people can watch in Battle for Boston me playing against the Prodigy, and you know he actually gets it in the first hand, and you see me, you know, I even do something crazy like place a 7, and you know you can see I'm like overly dominated in the hand, and then he just overventures and gives me the hand right back. I took a lesson from that moment and I said I can't have that happen again if I'm going to play a strength deck again. So I started to say to myself, okay, well, if that's the case and, you know, people are out there just trying to negate big boy cards, it's less about big boy cards and characters like Juggernaut. And I started to sway more into the idea of like what Phil Miller did. And what I sort of came up with, and again, you know, I think I was pretty proud of it, is I started to look through the old characters, new characters, and all the specials. And what I was going to come up with is I was going to play Heroes for Hire, Beast the Brute, Old Spider Woman in Reserve, and Silver Samurai. Now, people are like, Silver Samurai? Like, where are you coming with this, Marcel? Well, I was essentially going for the exact same process upon which Miller did. Now, I was actually going to play it with the Outback, and I was going to play it with the Crossing. Now, the way I looked at it is You can't negate JWs. And Silver Samurai has a JZ, and it's an energy JZ. So, it was the concept where now not only do I get to sort of mix a grid lightly in terms of, 8 strength, Silver Samurai having 8 fighting, but he actually also has 6 strength. So it still held the grid incredibly well, with my strengths being all in the 6 range, but I was able to sort of flex a little bit more on top of the idea of um, mixing up the power cards so that when something like an Annihilation Affair came by, it actually wasn't going to affect me as dramatically as it was affecting me per se in the last tournaments. So this is the way I was going to approach it. Now, not only was I approaching it in the facet of, now I have this JW and this JZ combo that, of course, are all 3 offsuits. And of course, the fighting aspect being, powerful from him as well. But he also has an incredibly offsuit 4. It's a 4 intellect, may make 1 additional attack. So it provides the speed that I'm looking for when I'm using something along the lines of the crossing. Because obviously in the crossing, I'm also using no cards with the word teammate, trying to flex against any defensive style crutch decks or any additional like heavy teamwork decks, but still giving me the speed that I get to play through the round. So you can only imagine there would be a round where I would have no cards with the word teammate, and I still can do a JW8, or I can also do a 4 intellect into a 5 energy JZ from Silver Samurai. Now, it was gangbusters. It was playing incredibly well. I was really geared to play in the tournament, but obviously, again, circumstances said I couldn't. Now, the other angle I was also looking at the meta was the fact that, okay, so if my opponent has dual negates, and I'm not necessarily wanting to throw too many specials that he's going to be able to affect with that, I was looking at the Outback as the best way to do it. Now, what I'm referencing by that is obviously you get the incredible defensive nature of the Outback. But my initial thought was, okay, well, now cards like Absorb Sound, Colossus, discard 3, these aren't really going to get through as much as they would back in, previous earlier in the year. So the way I was looking at it, and this is like probably your OP goat thought of the day, is that defensive special, the defensive 1 per deck of Pretty Boy coming out of the battle site is actually worth so much more because it can't be negated. Now, sure, you can negate it offensively on your turn, obviously, but the fact that I'm able to block off a character and have the ability to have that defensive 1 per deck, that I'm not even worried about your negates anymore. I was just going to consistently put pressure after pressure, only with a couple big teamworks, not much because I'm playing no cards with the word teammate, and situations like that. So that's just a light insight. Obviously, I could get into this deck even more deeply, but that's just a light insight to you at home about how I was looking at the meta, how I was thinking of how I could manipulate all these thoughts. Now, I could only imagine a matchup of, Phil Miller against myself would have catered very strongly towards me, because, as much as he has these defensive shell, it would have been a scenario where like he wouldn't have been able to block these sort of JWJZs in return, and also, having the event set where I'm consistently shutting down teamworks and cards with the word teammate and energy power cards. It just would have been a really good flex. But that's kind of like where my final meta thought was, at the end of this year and at the end of, I guess, the whole 2024 tournament season, with the idea of the dual negates, it really just sort of catered more to having defensive style deck, but also having these cards that are sort of like punch through and unable to sort of be able to be defended. Friends, that's the podcast for today. I'd love to just open it up. Did anybody see anything in the tournament that they thought really jumped out at them? Did I miss anything that you really thought was unique? What are your thoughts on Hobgoblin? Did anybody out there truly sort of like, you know, get inspired by some of these decks? And, like I said, the cards are coming. So I'll open it up for a minute or two just for a quick, question, thought process, anything you want to talk about, and then we'll kind of wrap this up. So yeah, again, just really great tournament in my mind. Really great tournament in my mind, and sort of I'm really proud of people for the way they brought decks, thought about decks, and didn't just sort of follow the norm. We do have a first question here. It does say, what would have been my strategy against someone like Howard's deck? Well, in that scenario, I think I probably would have been taken by surprise lightly in terms of his deck. Um, I am one of those people who, in the past, I've definitely looked at decks and underestimated them. Now, one thing I think that is a key thought that you could do to a deck like that, and any sort of lockout deck, if you look back actually in a Battle for Boston tournament 2 years ago, I believe I'm playing Ricky in a game, and he has a Jubilee style deck where he's playing, all Jubilee avoids. And he places a DB down, which is avoid all attacks from a teamwork. It took me a little while. I started thinking really through it, and I was like, how do I not get hit by that DB? I had a teamwork placed, and I was first, and so I threw it at his battle site. And by throwing it at the battle site, I knew he wasn't able to play the DB. I was able to sort of get the additional bonus off of the teamwork. Now, when I looked at this, it instantly was my thought when I saw Howard's deck. I believe he actually mentioned it to me as well, that later on in the week, and people started to sort of understand that that's a real viable and conceptual idea. When you look across the table at a complete lockout style deck, one thing you're going to learn very quickly is that when someone's locking out or playing those styles of cards, one thing that's very open is the battle site. And often in a lot of those lockout style decks or decks that cater to that strategy, you'll realize very quickly that they can't defend their battle site and that their deck heavily relies on the battle site. And in a lot of situations, decks like that, they can't muster up the venture to sort of like push a 5 or 6 at you, even if they know you're going for the battle site, because if you just change your mind and flip back to the team, you're probably going to be able to get at least enough venture points through, or like some pressure to sort of deal with that. Now, with that being said, I have to say, I don't know if that would have been my initial thought and approach to it, but I think I might have garnered that thought process pretty quickly after the second only universe, no universe gets slapped in my face. Now, sometimes you can't realize it until it's too late, and you have to sort of move on with that strategy. Now, the deck I was gonna play in the tournament, I don't think would have had too much problem with his lockout strategies. I had a lot of cards that could potentially pierce that, including the Dazzler 4 in the battle site. So I think it's one of those scenarios that it might not have given my deck a lot of problems, but I think against a generic defensive style deck, attacking the battle site is a thought process that I think a lot of people should cater to more. 30 points of venture is not as much as you think it is. You get 2 teamworks on a battle site. That's 12, right? Like it's very quick. And you know, as much as we understand KO pressure on a character like we have, um, when all of a sudden your battle sight's at 24 venture, you're conceding because you're about to lose your battle sight and all the cards in it, and now all of a sudden you're conceding looking for these defensive cards to defend, or you're holding all your power cards, and then all of a sudden you can't throw your own teamworks or something along those lines. So I think that would be a thought process to it. I don't necessarily think the deck I was going to bring would have had an issue necessarily with that deck, but of course, any cards can pop up at any time. But my deck would have had the bigger issue with dealing with his storm card. And when I'm venturing 4 and thinking I'm going to win it, and then he's just dropping it back down, I probably would have had to just get to the point where I attack Beyonder, I kill Beyonder. And a lot of decks, when I look at Beyonder decks, I kill Beyonder, because once you kill Beyonder in a Beyonder deck, the deck becomes very mortal very quickly, friends. You get rid of a Beyonder in a Beyonder deck, and all of a sudden you're looking at this mishmash of, mixed stat characters who, don't often gel very well together. I have another maybe statement. I don't know if it's a question per se. So it was unique, and I do agree with that. I don't necessarily know what um, the tournament organizer was using as a software for the tournament, but I did hear of a few things that didn't overly make sense. Often in tournaments when you start out 02 or 03, I tell people um, I tell people very often when I talk about tournaments and tournament performance, I tell people very often that the first game of the day is actually one of the most important games of the whole day of your tournament. And I would say to put everything, put all your eggs in one basket, lay everything on the line to essentially, try to win that first game, because it just sets your day off in such a different path than a loss. And what I mean by that is, often when you win the first game and the second game, when tiebreakers come at the end of the tournament, oftentimes you will be the tiebreaker person, because you will naturally be playing players that have a better record. Whereas when you go something like 0-2 and you're playing other 0-2 people, even if you win out all your games, you end up finding yourself falling out of tiebreakers because your opponent records aren't as good in terms of that. I know for a fact that Phil Miller did start 0-2 in this tournament, ended up being a 3-2 that made it in over other 3-2s. Again, I don't know the weighting. I don't know how it all worked. Home field advantage might have been a great, swing in that thought process. But basically, this is what I'll say. You can never, ever, in my mind, be upset if you get knocked out in a bubble and you had the same record as somebody, because your tournament is always in your hands. And if you won one more game, or if you, did something different, if you didn't make that micro mistake, if you kept your mind strong after your first loss and just pushed through and won the rest, you know, it's always in your own hands. I'm not a fan of tiebreakers. I hate them. I've been bubbled out of a couple tournaments when I didn't believe I should be, but that's just the name of the game. I've been the 8th seed and won a tournament, and I've been the 9th seed and, had a beer at the bar afterwards. So it's kind of the way it always is. And, it's going to be the way it is as we move forward. It's why we actually play 7 rounds of Swiss in most tournaments, because oftentimes in 7 rounds of Swiss, depending on the amount of players, roughly the players we've been getting, it often will create a cleaner style break, or have a blatant like 4-3 who was like 0-3 and then, won their last 4 games through the back end of the tournament. So It looks like we've kind of like hit our questions there. I don't really see too much about it in terms of anything else. Hey, I appreciate you. This was a long episode, but it was due. I owed you a long one because of how long I sort of been away. Had a little vacation there and then getting a little sick. So we are back on Wednesdays, friends. I look forward to you next Wednesday, 8 p.m. Again, keep an eye out. There is an LRG GOAT crossover podcast happening soon. I will keep you updated as we go. Thank you for joining the Overpower Mountain podcast. I am your host, Marcel, the greatest Overpower player of all time. And stay venturing.